I dragged myself to the laundromat on a boring Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. I wasn't even sure if it was grey outside, but I bet everyone feels the same way when they are stuck in the laundry room on a Sunday morning. I've only been using the laundromat for the past year or so. Before that, my wife used to do our laundry in the basement of our house. But I moved out about a year ago, and 6 months ago, my wife became my ex-wife. So now the laundry room is in my old house, and I've started a new routine of doing laundry here. I went to the laundromat that's like a mile away from my place on Sunday morning. I'm not a fan of waking up early to do laundry, but I didn't want it to ruin my weekend, so I dragged myself out of bed and got there early. I left early too to avoid the crowd and not have to deal with small talk with other people. Sunday mornings are for recovering from a hangover and reading the paper quietly, right? I've been going to that same laundromat for the past 9 months. Yo, I think I've seen that chick before, but never really noticed her. But this time, something was off. One of the wheels on her cart was all wonky, making it wobble like crazy. She had a bunch of dirty clothes piled up on there, making it even harder for her to push with one hand and hold the door open with the other. I was just chilling, reading the sports paper, but being the nice guy that I am, I put it down, walked over, and held the door open for her like a true gentleman. When she brought the cart inside, she glanced up at me and flashed a huge smile with shiny white teeth and big brown eyes. "Thank you, mister," she said as she walked over to the row of washing machines on the other side of the laundry room. She looked like she was maybe 7 or 8 years old, mixed race or maybe Hispanic, with long curly brown hair. She was adorable. I turned around, thinking my parents were following me, but they weren't there. Now I was both scared and curious. I watched as a kid loaded a bunch of stuff into. Throw all the clothes in the washing machine without bothering to separate colors from whites like I was taught. Then she dumped some detergent from her cart, put in the coins, and hit start. She pulled out a teddy bear from her bag, plopped down on a chair, and started chatting with it while the washer did its thing. From my spot across the room, I could see she was wearing jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, and a light pink jacket. The 6:30 a.m. morning had definitely seen better days. The clothes weren't exactly dirty, but they were definitely worn and faded with age. She looked a bit better than a street bum, but there was a strange calmness in her demeanor that didn't quite make sense to me. I couldn't believe that parents would send such a young child alone to do the family's laundry. As a parent myself, I just had a gut feeling that something was off about the whole situation. This made me think about my own kids, who were probably fast asleep at this very moment. Once they wake up, my kids will probably crawl into their cozy beds at my old place. Their mom, who is now my ex-wife, will most likely whip up a hot breakfast of pancakes, eggs, and possibly bacon for them. My son Ethan, who's 13, loves bacon, while my daughter Haley, who's 15, is all about the pancakes. I used to be all about waffles, but those happy Sunday morning breakfasts with the fam are now just a distant memory. As expected with a divorce, my wife got custody of the kids and I only get to see them on visits. Man, my wife is a real piece of work. She managed to turn our kids against me by blaming me for our family falling apart, saying I'm selfish. The kids wouldn't even talk to me, it was clear as day. My crime? Not putting up with her cheating on me with some other dude during a weekend getaway with friends. Turns out, she hooked up with some rich guy who made a habit of sleeping with married women. They planned it all out, just one night of fun, and then she'd come crawling back to me. She said she'd stay loyal to me forever, just like she was before the weekend. She gave me a heads up, so it wasn't technically cheating in her book. But she made sure to threaten me with taking half my money, half my stuff, the house, and wrecking my relationship with the kids if I kicked up a fuss. When I said no, she still took everything she said she would, and then blamed it all on me. And the kids believed her. I got screwed over big time. Thinking about those family breakfasts just made me hungry. I hadn't eaten anything since I scarfed down that last hot dog and chugged a Mickey's malt beer at the bar while watching the Knicks game. There was a janky vending machine on one wall with a Coke machine next to it. I'm pretty sure the owner of the place empties out both machines every day, otherwise they would have been broken into ages ago. I grabbed a pack of M&Ms and a Diet Coke, but as I was pulling out a can of Coke, I noticed the little girl next to me. So, I was just chilling, minding my own business when I noticed this girl staring at me. Turns out, she wasn't even looking at me, she was eyeing my snacks. I swear, it broke my heart. I went up to her and offered her some of my Diet Coke and M&Ms. She perked up and sat up straight, but then suddenly looked sad and turned down my offer. She said her mom told her not to take food from strangers, especially guys. That's a bummer. Hey sweetie, it's always smart to listen to your mom. I'll just leave the soda and M&Ms on the chair next to you, help yourself. I'll grab some more and head back to my spot. I put down the food, went back to the vending machines, got myself another Diet Coke and bag of M&Ms. I came back to my seat, picked up a new newspaper and sneakily watched her from above. After about 5 minutes, she grabbed a soda and M&Ms and sat down. Man, I was all about my business. I left after about 90 minutes, packed up my 2 bags and tossed them in the car. I totally forgot about the baby as I dipped, caught up in my own world and planning out how I was gonna spend the rest of Sunday. Honestly, I didn't even think about the baby again until the next Sunday when I was at the laundromat around 7 in the morning. So then, I was wondering if she would show up again, and sure enough, about half an hour later, she came back to the door dragging a cart full of clothes. I held the door open for her again, she thanked me once more, and headed towards the washing machines on the far wall. I noticed that she was wearing the same clothes as last week. I waited for her to start loading the machine, then carefully walked over and sat down in the seat next to her. I see you're having some trouble with the rear wheel on your cart, sweetheart. Is it okay if I try to fix it? She nodded yes, playing with her teddy bear. I turned the cart over. I looked back and saw that the back right wheel was messed up on the axle. I fixed it with my hands and then tested it by rolling the cart back and forth. Instant wagon repair. My little buddy seemed impressed. By the way, I'm Alex Rogers, I said as I reached out for a handshake. She extended her small hand with all the dignity she could muster and said in a serious tone, Maddie Ruiz. I'm very pleased to meet you, sir. Well, now that we've introduced ourselves, we're not strangers anymore, I said. What do you say? So she was like, can we get some soda and candy this week, with her eyes all big and curious. I was like, sure, a real Coke for you, a Diet Coke for me, and a few M&Ms for both of us. We sat and chatted for like 2 hours. I grabbed a notepad and pen from the car and showed her how to play tic-tac-toe. It took her like 5 minutes to catch on, but then she started getting the hang of it. I let her win a few times, just like I do with my kids sometimes. For a little bit, I was lost in my own thoughts, thinking about playing with her. My kids, I was totally lost in my thoughts when my ex-wife Tracy looked me dead in the eyes and said she was gonna hook up with Robert Goldstein III, some hotshot lawyer from the city. That night was the beginning of the end for me. She said it was just a fling, just sex, but come on, who was she kidding? I knew that one night would destroy our marriage. I yelled back at her, telling her not to act like it was no big deal. She shouted back, begging me not to throw away 18 years of marriage over one mistake. But I couldn't let it slide. I was sneaking around behind your back like we could totally pull this off, and you probably never would have seen it coming. Just hand it over to me, Alex. Tracy grabbed Robert's hand and led him to his bedroom in the 4-room cottage. After standing there with my mouth hanging open for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute, I grabbed my stuff and left. Now it's your turn, Alex, Maddie said, snapping me back to reality. I marked an X in one of the side boxes, giving Maddie the chance to get 3 O's in a row diagonally and win. She had this big grin on her face as she crossed off her 3 high fives. I held my hand out for a high five, but she looked at me funny, then stood on her chair to reach my hand. Hold it, she said. I stayed in the laundry room until Maddie's clothes were done. I offered her a ride home, but she said no because of her mom's rules. Mom must be pretty smart, I said. I'd like to meet her sometime. Maybe one day, she replied. She doesn't really go out in public. Most of the time Maddie would answer back. We kept in touch with Maddie as winter changed to spring and spring turned into summer. I began packing a small bag with sandwiches and snacks for both of us and got soda from the laundromat in the morning. I wasn't really hungry at that time, but I figured if I ate a sandwich, she would too. She was really skinny. So, I started packing an extra sandwich and told her she could take it home for her mom. She didn't say no and always thanked me. So, she was like, I'm totally 7 years old and gonna be in 2nd grade at the school down the street in the fall. My dad wasn't around and Maddie said she never even met her dad. Her mom was always working while Maddie was at school and she didn't even know what her mom did. But her mom was always home when Maddie got back from school. They mostly just chilled at home or went to the park when it was nice out. They watched a lot of TV together, too. I knew all the new cartoons on the kids' channels, but I couldn't name a single one. We didn't have money for extra stuff, but sometimes Mom would go on dates on Saturday nights and leave me, Maddie, with the rule to go to bed by 9 p.m. So, on Sunday morning, her mom woke her up, handed her some cash for a washer and dryer, and sent her off to the laundromat. To be honest, my life wasn't much better back then, even though I had enough money to get by with alimony, mortgage payments, and child support. My salary as a lead programmer didn't leave me with much extra cash for fun stuff. Usually, I'd just go out randomly to a bar with friends. I wasn't really dating at all, but I didn't mind. I did miss my kids, though, at least until I remembered how much of a handful they could be. Man, they didn't give a damn about me after Tracy and I split. I tried to focus on the good times we had together, but reality kept smacking me in the face. When Tracy called me the morning after I left Robert Goldstein's lake house, she was freaking out. She was like, "Where the hell are you?" My phone said it was 10:06, but I swear it felt like it was already 2:13 in the afternoon after chugging down more Eagle Rare bourbon. I must have stumbled to bed and passed out. She was all pissed off, yelling about how I left her stranded at the lake house. "How the heck do I even get home?" she was screaming. She kept yelling at me, "Then you let Robert Goldstein take you home." I hung up the phone while she kept screaming. You can't hang up on a cell phone as fast as you could with a landline back in the day. I would have definitely thrown my phone against the wall. The next Sunday, Maddie showed up at the laundromat 15 minutes later than usual, without her bag of clothes. Tears were running down her face and I thought she must have been robbed. She was holding her teddy bear tight. "Mum didn't come home last night and I don't have money for laundry." When I asked if she sometimes doesn't come home, she shook her head, her big brown eyes filled with tears. "Mom always comes home, it's one of her rules." I calmed her down and gave her the food I had brought. I was in unfamiliar territory and didn't know what to do. I asked if there was someone she could stay with until her mom comes home, but she shook her head again. Man, I had a mouthful of PBJ when I realized I couldn't just leave her alone in the apartment. If I called the cops without a solid plan, they'd for sure throw her in foster care ASAP and maybe even take her away from her mom for good if they thought she wasn't fit to care for her. I was already doubting her abilities. "How about we ditch this place and go to your place instead? We can leave a note for your mom, saying we are at my place. She can call me when she gets back and I'll bring you to her." I could see her brain working on that idea. All right, so Maddie broke one of her mom's rules, but since her mom wasn't home, she didn't feel like chilling in her apartment all day. So, after I packed up my stuff and loaded it into the car, she finally agreed to come with me. We swung by her place first, but we didn't bother grabbing anything from there because she didn't have much to begin with. Just a few outfits that were either already worn or mixed in with the dirty laundry pile. I told her we would stop somewhere to pick up some stuff for her, like a new toothbrush and comb. She smiled sadly. I left a note with my name and number on the kitchen table, then we went to get Maddie's things. I let her pick out some tops, jeans, undies, and socks at the Dollar General nearby. She was super happy, but I was starting to worry about what to do if her mom didn't show up soon. We watched cartoons and the Disney Channel, and I made lunch. Me and Maddie had dinner together, and at 9 o'clock I tucked her into the spare room on the sofa. I was planning on calling in sick to work the next day to take care of some stuff. Maddie and I waited until lunchtime on Monday to go back to her apartment, but there was no sign of anyone being there since the day before when we were there. I snooped around a bit and found a drawer in her mom's dresser with some papers in it. One of the things I found was Maddie's birth certificate, which didn't have the dad's name on it. So, Maddie's mom's name was Fiona Ruiz. I brought the birth certificate and a pic of Maddie and her mom. The pic was probably taken when Maddie was around 2 years old. She looked like a little kid, and they were hugging in front of the camera. Fiona seemed to be about 25 years old, with the same long curly brown hair as Maddie. They both had smiles on their faces in the pic, but Fiona's eyes still looked tired and sad. I couldn't help but wonder if that look had been there for a while. As I was going through her mom's stuff, I tried to chat with Maddie and told her I was searching for something to help find her mom. She seemed cool with it. When we got back to my place, I put on the Disney Channel for Maddie, called the cops, and reported Fiona Ruiz missing. I didn't have much to say to the officer on the phone. Basically, I just told them that something must have happened to Fiona for her to leave her kid. "Is the kid by herself in the apartment right now, sir?" asked the officer. "No, she's with me. I'm her best friend. I can look after her until everything is sorted out. If you're okay with it, I'd really appreciate it. I was afraid she'd end up in foster care, and I've heard nothing good about that system. I know I can take care of her properly if I'm allowed to keep her." While I was thinking about this, somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered that my boss's wife, Darlene, has some powerful connections in the social services industry. Maybe I can try to work out a favor with her. I like to believe that my boss and I have a good relationship. I've been working for him for 20 years and have always done a damn good job for his company. We've always gotten along well on a personal level, and he and his wife were there for me during my divorce. Darlene suddenly showed up at my apartment about 20 minutes after my conversation with her husband. She said she wanted to make a new friend, so I introduced her to Maddie. So, this girl Darlene totally charmed Maddie in, 5 minutes, and when she left an hour later, I hugged her and she promised to do everything she could to keep Maddie with me. Later that day, 2 cops showed up at my place looking for Fiona Ruiz. I gave them a pic of Maddie and her mom. Then I took Maddie to work with me and signed her up for our company daycare that I started 15 years ago but never used for my own kids. Tracy used to be a stay-at-home mom until the kids could take care of themselves after school, but for me, being a single dad, it was a lifesaver. At least until school started, I would take Maddie to work with me in the morning, have lunch with her at noon, and take her home in the evening. It was a pretty good arrangement overall. Having Maddie with me helped me cope with my own kids ditching me. I hardly ever saw them, and when I did, it was usually just for dinner at a local restaurant. I didn't bring Maddie along when I went out with them. My kids left her with our neighbor, Mrs. Olivares, without even bothering to show her how they really felt about me. Maddie was like a breath of fresh air for me. Because of financial constraints, she and her mother didn't do much outside of their home. So a lot of the things I did with Maddie were new experiences for her. The first time we went to a fancy restaurant instead of just grabbing fast food, she was completely captivated. It was like she had never seen anything like it before. And when we went to the park and stopped to have a pretzel and soda after playing on the playground, she was just so thrilled. I asked her to come over for tea, and I swear she was grinning for a whole week after that. I know I was grinning for a week too, just hearing her go on about her experience. Turns out she could speak Spanish too, and she started teaching me. She used to crack up when I messed up words and phrases. One time at McDonald's, I accidentally ordered horse meat and a Coke, and she laughed so hard she cried. It never crossed her mind that most people weren't bilingual. I made sure she stayed at the same school she went to in first grade because it was the easiest for her. When I enrolled Maddie in school, I just used her birth certificate and said I was her contact and my place was her address. The cops never hit me up about Maddie's mom or the social services peeps wanting to put her in foster care. Darlene must have pulled some strings, or the city just had too much on their plate to care about Maddie and me. Oh, and my cooking game got better too, cause when Maddie was with me, it wasn't just pizza and beer all the time. Okay, so we started watching cooking shows on the Food Channel and cooking together in the kitchen. This is something I never really did with my kids because Tracy was a great cook, I have to admit. But with my daughter Maddie's help, I learned and became a better person. We had a lot of fun in the kitchen, I won't lie. It wasn't all rainbows and butterflies though. We had our fair share of disagreements and problems like any other family. But hey, we're just like any other family. We've been together for just over a year now, and Maddie. So, me and Maddie, we've kind of become our own little family. It really hit me one day during Maddie's school open house in 3rd grade. We were walking down the hallway when one of Maddie's friends and her parents came up to us. Maddie's friend introduced her parents as mom and dad, and then Maddie introduced me as her dad. I never really thought of us as a family like that before, so when she called me her daddy, I was totally caught off guard. It was a pretty amazing moment. When I heard those words, I was so happy that I choked up for a second. My vision got blurry and I had to tell Reynolds that I was sorry for my silence. I made up some excuse about having a snack stuck in my throat. Maddie saw right through it, looked at me suspiciously, and squeezed my hand. She never called me Alex again, and that made me really happy. I was having such a great time being a parent again that I didn't even realize it had been over 2 years since I last dated a woman. Maddie brought it up one day at the grocery store while we were walking up and down the aisles. So, we were at the store grabbing stuff from our list, right? And then, in the fruit and veggie section, we walked past this short lady. I didn't pay much attention, but Maddie gave her a double take. Wow, Dad, that lady is really pretty. You should ask her out, Maddie said. I was busy checking my list when she said that, so I stopped the cart and checked out the lady. She was stunning. And then, she looked up at me and we exchanged shy smiles. Well, aren't you gonna say something to her? Dad, Maddie asked, looking at us. At this point, I wanted to disappear. But what the heck, maybe the lady would cut us some slack. So I went for it the old-fashioned way. Hi, I'm Alex and this is Maddie. Like you just heard, Maddie thinks I should ask you out or something, I stuttered. And what do you think, she asked, looking me straight in the eye and giving me $1 million smile. I was completely blown away. Caramel-colored skin, beautiful white teeth, a smile that could melt ice in my heart. She looked to be about 35 years old, 5 feet 2 inches. She was probably around 110 pounds, and even though she had on a light jacket, she had curves in all the right places and looked good in her jeans. There wasn't a ring on her left hand, so I quickly thought about whether Maddie had noticed. Do you want to grab dinner with us sometime, all of us together, or just you and me if you prefer? Maddie joked, curb your Romeo. In a more serious tone, the woman responded, it was smart of you to ask your daughter to scout out single women for you at the grocery store. I blushed and admitted, honestly, it wasn't my idea. I would never do that, honestly. Yes, exactly, Romeo. Am I buying this? No, but yes, I would like that. Have dinner with both of you. By the way, I'm Cherry Roberts. Seriously, was it that simple? Damn, I should have used that image a long time ago. I said, and she and I giggled. We made a date for next Saturday. She said she loves Italian food and Maddie and I have some good recipes. After we exchanged phone numbers and I gave her my address, Maddie and I turned to continue shopping. We fist bumped as we turned the corner into the... Damn, she definitely set us up for sure. Maddie shouted after us. Finally, the next Saturday arrived and I swear the days couldn't go any slower. After cleaning the apartment, Maddie and I got busy making homemade lasagna, garlic bread sticks, salad, and homemade torroni for dessert. Cooking calmed my nerves because, to be honest, I was nervous as hell. It's been over 20 years since my last date, and then it hit me suddenly it's been 20 years since my last date. Of course, all of those last dates were with Tracy and I had to think. Man, it's tough to remember who I was seeing before Tracy and I got together. I think it might have been Marion Rizzo. Last I heard, she ended up marrying the next guy she dated after me. I wonder if they are still together or if her marriage went down the same path as mine. I had to tell myself to chill out. It's just a date, not a big deal. I wasn't the only one getting all worked up though, Maddie seemed pretty excited too. She was right there beside me, helping me out while we were cleaning. Yo, so I was cooking, right? And I didn't even realize it, but Cherry was the first person to come over to our place who wasn't old Mrs. Ols or at least 10 years older. Dinner went pretty well, I mean, I was kinda nervous at first, but having an 8-year-old around really breaks the ice. So, my mom was like, are you married, Cherry, when I handed Cherry a glass of Golano shortly after she got here. Cherry blushed, almost as much as I did, and then she looked straight at Maddie and said quietly, I used to be married. So, there was this great guy I used to be with, but that's all ancient history now. I could see the sadness and hurt in her eyes when she found out my dad was married and had 2 other kids besides me. That's when I figured I'd better fill Cherry in on my past marriage and divorce, and how I ended up being Maddie's dad. Surprisingly, she took it all in stride, with a tough expression on her face. Both Cherry and Maddie got a bit emotional when I mentioned that Maddie's mom never came back home, but Maddie quickly brushed it off. So I was talking to Cherry and I was like, hey, cool name Cherry. Your parents must have been in a good mood when they named you, huh? And Cherry was like, actually, my real name is Marcel, but everyone calls me Sella for short. One day, my little brother saw a box of Sella chocolate-covered cherries at the grocery store and started calling me Cherry. It stuck, and now everyone calls me that. I was like, yeah, Cherry suits you way better than Marcella. Then I saw some thick glasses on the table. Damn, that guy has some dark sunglasses and a nice ass, that's rough, Cherry said, laughing. You better not ever call me Cherry, she added. Cherry hung out with us until it was time for Maddie to go to bed at 9 o'clock, then she said she had to go too. I hope she wasn't just being polite when she said she had a good time and suggested we hang out at her place next time. I gave her a quick kiss on the lips as she left. For a moment, I thought I smelled alcohol on her, but so much time had passed that I must have been mistaken. Dreaming, I really like her dad. I think she'll fit in well with us, Maddie said after I closed the door. I had to admit, at least to myself, that the kid was right. We had family date nights for 5 Saturdays in a row and I think we all had a good time. However, I knew I needed to try one-on-one to see if there was a chance of anything happening. Maddie took the news well when I told her that I was inviting Cherry to the restaurant, just the two of us, and that she would spend the evening with Mrs. Olivares. I definitely wasn't going to leave Maddie hanging. I ain't gonna diss Maddie's mom, but I couldn't just leave my 8-year-old home alone while I went on a date. Plus, both me and Maddie knew that the last time she was left alone, it didn't end well. So, I booked a table at a fancy steakhouse for our first solo date, or as Maddie liked to call it. I knew things would be different when I showed up at Cherry's place to pick her up. She was rocking a sexy silk dress that was a bit snug and showed some cleavage. Her top was low-cut to show off her big boobs and her skirt was short to make her legs look longer. She had more makeup on than usual and a sexier, spicy perfume. Shit, I forgot my cologne. How am I gonna stand out from all the other guys? Maybe my charm will do the trick, she joked. We had a good dinner and talked about some mature stuff without Maddie. It was a good time. Isn't it kinda weird that she wasn't with me? You miss her now, don't you? Cherry suddenly asked, looking right into my eyes. I sort of admitted, except for school and work, we're always together and I don't mind one bit. You really miss the first two, don't you? She asked. It's terrible, although not with the attitude that appeared after I left. I know they are still children, but they don't even try to see things from my point of view. My ex really turned them against me. It seems to me that you get along well with them. Hey kids, can I ask why you never had any of your own? Nah, it's cool. We were thinking about it, but then I made the stupidest decision ever. I disrespected and cheated on my husband just for some forbidden fun. I was a total idiot and hurt the person I cared about the most. I'll never make that mistake again if I ever get the chance to love someone like that again. Cherry's voice cracked as she said that. I missed the last part, but I heard every word that was whispered pretty clearly. Her eyes were filled with tears that she couldn't hold back. I gave her my napkin and she wiped her eyes carefully. I'm sorry if I made you go somewhere you didn't want to go, I said. I've never talked to anyone about this before, she said. Not even my parents. I'm too embarrassed. Well, enough of the serious talk, I said. Let's smoke this joint and see if you can dance. Missy, how old are you? I think I'm 12, actually. I thought you were 35, but I'm 44, so to me, you're still a kid. I said, really 35, and she was delighted. I'm actually 42, I was married for 12 years, divorced for 9 years. You're really good for a girl's ego, sir. It's hard to believe you're only 2 years younger than me. I look like I could practically be your older brother. I laughed, paid the bill, and we went to a dance club that Tracy and I sometimes visited. I'm no Fred Astaire, but Tracy loved going to dances, so one of the first things I did when we had some time, I decided to make some extra cash by taking dance lessons. But let me tell you, watching my wife dance with other guys was not fun at all. Cherry was so graceful on the dance floor, it was like she was floating. We danced to both slow and fast music for about half an hour before I needed a breather. Cherry could have kept going, but she walked off the floor with me and we found a table. I went to grab a drink at the bar, but before I could even leave the table, the first guy swooped in like a vulture. I watched from afar as it all unfolded. I was side-eyeing Cherry, trying not to be too obvious, when I saw her smiling and laughing. The joke must have been kinda funny, but she didn't budge from the table. I was happy to see her enjoying her margarita when I passed it to her. Then, another vulture showed up, a dude who looked about 25. He noticed me, but still went straight to Cherry and asked her to dance. "Sorry, buddy, but she's with me," I told him. I don't appreciate being disrespected, especially by kids. I said it calmly but firmly, keeping my cool. Even though I had a smile on my face, there was definitely no smile in my eyes. The guy obviously knew he was breaking some kind of rule. "Sorry dude, I didn't realize you two were together," he whined before sneaking away. We finished our drinks and headed back to the dance floor, staying there for about 30 minutes. Another guy tried to butt in, but at least he had the decency to ask me first. When I told him no, he took it in stride, extended his hand and said, "You can't blame a guy for trying, she's gorgeous." We went back to our table and had another drink. So, we were just about done with our drinks when this vulture comes out of nowhere and asks if he can cut in and dance with Cherry. I was pretty beat, but I figured if she was up for it, then why not? Cherry shook her head, though, so I had to break the news to him. I ended up taking her back to her place and she invited me in for a bit. It was still pretty early, only 10:30 at night. So, me and her, we had a glass of wine and chatted casually for another hour. Then, I got up and she got up with me. I didn't know how to end the date, and I probably looked like a deer in headlights because she giggled, which I really liked. I blushed deeply and she knew I was in trouble. "Don't worry, Alex, we're not in a rush, are we?" she said. Fast forward 2 weeks later, and we ended up in my bedroom. I broke my 2-year streak of no action. It wasn't anything crazy because Maddie was sleeping in the next room, but it felt so good to have some intimate time. Having a real woman in your arms was nice for a bit, but Cherry didn't seem to mind even though it wasn't part of the plan for the evening. She ended up spending the night in my bed, snuggled up against me. In the morning, she borrowed one of my white shirts that was a bit oversized but still looked super hot on her. We went to the kitchen and Maddie joined us, getting all excited when she saw Cherry was still around. She ran up to her and gave her a big hug. Pushing her over, they hugged really tight and both looked genuinely happy to be in each other's arms. It was almost cheesy how affectionate they were, and I just rolled my eyes at them. "Pancakes, pancakes," they both shouted together. "Chocolate chip pancakes," I shouted back. 6 months later, Cherry moved in for good and we became like a modern-day Brady Bunch, even though I was still paying alimony and child support. I was making good money and Cherry worked at an accounting firm, making decent money too. Maddie had everything she needed, even though she didn't really ask for much. I think when you don't have a lot growing up, even the little things can feel like a big deal. It's all relative, you know. We may have seemed like a modern-day Brady Bunch, but in reality, we were more like the odd couple, or maybe even the odd trio. We were a mix of black, white, and Hispanic, and we all had different last names. Some of these issues got sorted out when I signed Maddie up for 4th grade in the fall and just listed her name as Maddie. So, like, Ruiz was there with me when I signed her up, and she was totally shocked when she saw what I wrote. She didn't say anything until we left the school, and then she just lost it. "Can I be a Rogers like you?" she squealed. "Well, technically not quite legal yet, but in a few years, sure," I replied. "But according to the Rogers rules, you're totally allowed to join the club." I did air quotes when I said Rogers rules, but that didn't stop Maddie. She just jumped into my arms and started kissing my cheeks. After like 30 seconds of celebrating, Maddie pulled away and gave. She gave me a cold stare and I was a bit surprised until she finally spoke. "When can Cherry turn into Rogers?" she asked. "You know, that's actually a really good question. I'll have to ponder on that one." In fact, on our first date anniversary, I asked Maddie to stay with Mrs. Olivares while I went to the jeweler after work to buy gifts for Tracy. Cherry said she would be home late and have dinner on her own, so I figured I had a few hours to find the perfect ring. It was just after 6 when I walked out of Jean Horowitz Jewelers after designing a custom engagement ring, then ordered pizza for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and myself. I drove to my favorite pizza place in a little shopping center. Just as I was about to get out of the car, I noticed a trendy little bar nearby. And that's when my world came crashing down again. My ex-girlfriend Cherry walked into the bar holding hands with a good-looking 40-year-old black guy. She looked so happy and full of life. I stood there frozen, unable to move, breathe, or think. I don't know what to do. Man, I was sitting in the car for God knows how long before I realized I wasn't even breathing and felt like I was gonna pass out. So I took a couple of deep breaths, then I figured I needed to feed Maddie. I ended up going to the pizza joint and placing an order. I drove home in a daze and don't remember much about the evening until Cherry got home around 8. She was still buzzing and seemed to be in a good mood when she walked through the door, like a "Hey, guess who I bumped into tonight?" My brother John, who snuck into town without telling anyone. So, he tells me, and after I finished work, he invites me to dinner. I figured since you guys were having pizza, I might as well grab a bite with him. She went quiet when she saw the look on my face. "Is this the story you came up with?" I asked quietly. Cherry looked shocked as the reality of what I said sunk in. "You went to Silverto for pizza tonight and saw me with him, didn't you? And you thought, you son of a," she yelled at me. I was pretty surprised. I was expecting guilt and apologies, not an attack. This must be some kind of mistake. Thinking of a new way to say sorry, I thought. Cherry never cussed me out before, but I'm starting to see why she might have a point. You don't even trust me enough to give me a chance. I know I messed up and cheated on my husband. I was honest about it and promised not to do it again. I get that your ex did a number on you, but that's on her, not me. Don't you dare disrespect me like that again or I'm gone. She left in a hurry. Mrs. Oliver walked out like nothing happened as Cherry went off. I noticed Mardia sneaking away to her room. I wished the couch would just swallow me whole, but no such luck. "You're right," I said quietly. I let Trace's doubt creep into my mind and affect how I see you. You're your own person, and if I can't see that, then it's my fault and I don't deserve you. I wasn't planning on telling her about the ring yet, but after messing up like that, I had to play my best card. Man, she looked like she was ready to bite someone's head off. If looks could kill, I'd be dead by now. I know this might not be the best time, but I gotta show you how much you mean to me. Give me your left hand. She came closer, holding out her hand with her palm up. I turned it over, put a piece of paper on her ring finger, and secured it with an elastic band from my shirt pocket. She looked confused as hell. "What the hell?" she said, taking the paper off her finger and unfolding it. "Did you see that ugly?" she shouted excitedly. Then Cherry kissed me with so much passion, it was even better than anything Tracy ever did. After we finished, she called Maddie to come out of her room. "Look, baby, look," she said to Maddie, handing her the receipt for the ring. "I'm going to be Mrs. Rogers too." The two girls laughed and squealed so loudly that it was almost unbearable for the guys, but I managed to keep my hearing intact as they danced around the room. When they finally stopped, Cherry hugged me tightly. She pressed a button on her phone and yelled, "Hey, you gotta come meet your future son-in-law." Maddie went to get Mrs. Oliver and brought her back so Cherry could show off her ring. It still felt like Christmas morning in the apartment when Cherry's brother showed up. He was just as good-looking as Cherry, if not more. Looking at him again, I couldn't help but be grateful that he was her brother and not her boyfriend like I had thought. We shook hands when Cherry introduced us, but then he reached out. He came up to me and gave me a big hug, saying that handshakes are for friends but hugs are for family. He warned me that if I ever hurt her, he would beat the crap out of me. I got the message loud and clear as he squeezed my hand tighter. I was barely breathing. I whispered back, "Yeah, I got it." Cherry quickly explained what happened before I proposed to her. He looked at me, pretending to be surprised, and said he was glad I was still alive. She gave him a look. A laser death stare, didn't she? John asked. Yes, she killed people with that look, Maddie and Mrs. Ohlers noted. They were smart enough to leave the room when they saw that look. Then he turned to Maddie, looked her up and down, and said, "So, this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I have always wanted to have nephews and nieces. I think you'll be a great fit." Maddie smiled shyly and then her face lit up like a sunny day. "Does this mean I can call you Mom?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't answer because she was crying. She reached out to Maddie and they hugged for a long time, both crying for their own reasons. Even with Darlene's help, we had to wait until Maddie was 16 before we could officially adopt her. By then, she could have legally become independent, but Cherry and I weren't worried. The government only approved what we, Maddie, and Cherry had already established as family many years ago. Family isn't always about blood or legal papers. And then, out of nowhere, I hadn't heard squat from my kids in over 6 years, so imagine my shock when Haley called out of the blue. Without even checking the caller ID, I just answered like I always do, "Alex Rogers, Dad speaking." "Hey, it's me, Haley," she blurted. "Don't freak out, Dad, everything's cool. I'm actually getting hitched next month and wanted to invite you to the wedding." I was totally shocked when I found out my daughter was getting married in a month and I didn't even know the guy she was marrying. The last time I saw my kids was at Ethan's 16th birthday dinner and they were all pretty quiet. Finally, Ethan dropped the bomb that he was 16 now and the court-ordered visits were done for him and Haley. "We don't have to see you anymore if we don't want to. We've talked everything out and we don't want to see you. You abandoned us to protect your dumb pride. Well, you can take your pride and stick it up your ass." I have to give my son credit, he was a great customer. Even though he couldn't look me in the eyes when he talked to me, he never raised his voice. As for her, she kept looking back and forth between Ethan and me. I knew this day would come eventually. It was all Trace's doing. Her fingerprints were all over it. I'm sure you know what wedding vows are, and your mom not only broke ours but also threw them in my face. She's made you both believe that I'm the bad guy here, and nothing I say will convince you otherwise. But for me, breaking our wedding vows is not something I can just brush off like a broken-down family car. It cuts deep into my soul. And even though I knew leaving would hurt you, staying would hurt me even more because it would destroy my soul. If I wasn't who I am, we wouldn't be alike. You'll see one day it was Mom's fault for shifting blame onto me. I won't take the blame if that's what you both want. Dad, Haley said, snapping me back to reality. Don't you want to go? I really do, Haley baby. You know I even saved up money for this day, I replied. You don't have to worry about money, Dad. Bob's got it covered. Bob, I asked about him, right? We are talking about Robert Goldstein III, aren't we? She sounded irritated at first, then switched to pity. Turns out, Mom married Bob about 6 years ago after we stopped seeing each other, she said. So, this jerk messed up my marriage, messed up my relationship with my kids, messed me up financially, and then went ahead and married my ex-wife. All because of my pride. Haley, every time my son asks for an apology from me, don't be like that, Dad. I ain't inviting you here to start trouble, you won't snitch on me, you won't spill the beans in front of your fam. I just want you to come, cool. Cool. But on one small condition, that I can bring my fam too. Yes, even a loser like me has a family, Haley. I got a great wife and an awesome daughter, you'll dig em if you hang out with them. Haley was silent, lost in her thoughts. I never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie, honestly I didn't want them to know. Hey Mom, I gotta ask, do you have any other kids? And if you do, does she know about me and Ethan? Haley asked, sounding almost like she was in a daze. Maddie is 16 now, she's adopted. We've been tight for 9 years, I mean I practically found her on the streets. She knows all about you, about our past and what we don't have anymore. She's a real happy-go-lucky kinda gal, full of life. We both went through some tough times together, like it was meant to be. Can't wait for you to meet the rest of the fam, Haley said, recovering from her emotional moment. Man, can you believe the wedding went down on Saturday night in some fancy-ass place? I mean, it makes sense since the girl's dad is loaded. Gotta give props to old Bob for not holding back on his stepdaughter. The actual ceremony was in this dope old church in the city. Me and the girls planned it perfectly, we got there just in time for the service and sat in the back row. Saw some familiar faces, but arriving last minute meant we didn't have to do any awkward small talk beforehand. And then Haley and Mark were. As we left the church and walked in front, I got a kiss thrown my way. We made it to the reception just in time to snag a table at the back of the room, which wasn't really fair to Cherry and Maddie. They had a spa day on Friday and bought new dresses. Cherry's was classy and sexy, while Maddie looked like she was 21 with all that makeup on for the first time. Every dad's worst nightmare. But they both respected my wishes and didn't whine when we finally sat down after I went to the bar to grab a drink. Got a wine for me and Cherry and a Coke for Maddie. As expected, some old friends started coming over to the table to say hi and catch up as soon as they saw me. Then Trace's parents, Rhonda and William, showed up. Rhonda started crying as soon as she came in for a kiss, and William gave me a big hug, even tighter than when Tracy and I were married. I introduced Cherry and Maddie to them, and they both seemed a bit awkward, but I get it. I was married to their daughter for 18 years. Since I didn't have any input or contribute to the job, I didn't feel like it was my place to mingle and socialize with the crowd. So, the girls and I mostly just stayed at our table when people came up to us. But I'm not stupid. I could tell from the looks on many people's faces, especially the wives of former friends, that they were surprised to see me with a beautiful black woman and a Spanish-speaking princess. It was like they thought I had brought a trophy wife to the party. And just then, Tracy and Bob, our friendly hosts, showed up. Being married to someone for almost 20 years really shows you all the little details of their personality. From the moment Tracy saw Cherry, she could tell she didn't like her. Maybe it was because Cherry was too dark, or maybe it was because Cherry was too good-looking. It's more likely that Cherry had a flat stomach, great legs, and looked way younger than her actual age. Could it be that Cherry was just with the wrong guy in the room? Definitely. With all the thoughts running through her head about Cherry, Tracy just couldn't handle it. I didn't even realize it had been 10 years since we last saw each other face to face. She practically jumped out of her skin when I came over and gave her a kiss on the cheek. "Oh Alex, sorry about the struggle with the new heels," she said. "No worries babe, you look great," I fibbed. "Let's go meet my new fam," I said, introducing Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob. I shook Bob's hand warmly and presented him as the key to my future success. Everyone, except Maddie, cringed when So I was just saying this, right? But then my daughter gave me a sly look and squeezed my arm. "Let me tell you, this kid is sharp." We talked for about 5 minutes, not really saying much until Tia and Bob took off and the bride and her new husband showed up. As Tracy and Bob walked away, Maddie kind of shook her head, letting me know she wasn't any more excited to see them than I was. Then, my other daughter and my fiancé greeted me way more warmly than I expected. She hugged me and started crying, while my new son-in-law, Cherry, and Maddie just stood there. I was totally shocked and speechless when she finally released me. She said, "Forgive me, Dad, for everything," as she struggled to speak. "I didn't realize what you were trying to teach me until I made my own promise just 2 hours ago. As I was making the vow, I suddenly understood the pain you went through when your mom cheated on you and broke her promise. I used to blame you and your stubbornness, just like Ethan. But now I get it, you were right all along in how you handled things." She was totally out of line when she not only acted like that, but also blamed you. "How can I make it right for the hurt Ethan and I caused you?" I felt a huge lump in my throat, like a freaking football. I haven't cried since I messed up my knee playing soccer in 10th grade, but I was damn close standing here with my family all around. "So, how about you start by introducing me to this good-looking guy you married, and then do me the honor of dancing?" I said, "Oh yes, of course, of course." She replied somewhat embarrassed. "I haven't found Mr. Right yet, Mark. This is Alex Rogers, my future father-in-law." We shook hands and then I had to do the whole intimidating dad routine and reminded him to never hurt my daughter or else. I introduced him to Hal and Em, and just as the orchestra started playing, Hal suggested hitting the dance floor. I was totally into it, so I took her hand. The crowd, who had been booing me before, booed even louder when Haley greeted me. Once I got Haley out on the dance floor, I realized I was starting to look like Tracy and Bob, but I had plenty of time to catch up. The band was playing some cheesy children's music, which I couldn't stand, but thanks to my wife who loves to dance, I knew how to bust a move. Haley was surprised to see her old man could dance, and we managed to last through 2 songs. By the end of the second song, a crowd had gathered around us. Haley gave me a big hug, the crowd cheered, and Cherry and I were the stars of the dance floor. Maddie was waiting for me with big smiles on their faces. I grabbed their hands and pulled them both down to the floor with me, and the three of us started dancing while everyone else joined us. "Well, look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry said in my ear as she came closer. "Who would have thought that marrying off a daughter could be so much fun?" I quickly turned to Maddie and joked, "Let's wait a few more years. I'm not sure my heart can handle all this fun. Turn me on, old man." Maddie smiled back, and all three of us stayed on the floor for 6 more songs. Me and the girls were jamming out to some songs, then I bounced to the bar for a cold Jack and plopped down at my table to chill. Cherry and Maddie were having a blast on the dance floor. I didn't even notice Tracy come and sit next to me. She touched my shoulder and I instantly knew it was her. This was supposed to be our day, not Bob's and mine. Tracy whispered in my ear, "You threw away 18 good years for what? You obviously didn't love me enough." I didn't even bother turning my head towards her. "Hey, you're the one who obviously didn't care enough about me to not go through with it, especially after I warned you about the consequences. You didn't love me enough and you didn't respect me enough. But hey, you ended up with Bob in the end, and is not too bad if you ask me." I ended up with Cherry and Maddie. Like the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you find what you need. You were a jerk back then and you're still a jerk now, maybe even more so. But I'm a lucky person who didn't lose out. Couldn't sleep for a minute because of your dumb decision. And no, I wasn't waiting for an apology, I'm good. Ethan showed up again in my life when he started dating some chick a few years back. Loyalty is easier to get when you're involved in the situation, why I know. He randomly called me and said we needed to chat, so I told him to come over to the crib. He brought a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey with him. When I opened the door, Haley was like, "You really love this drink," and then she just decided. "Hey, I should make it up to you," he said as I brought him into the apartment. We only talked briefly at Haley's wedding, and that was kinda awkward. It's been over 2 years since then, and even though Haley and I patched things up, Ethan and I still hadn't. So, I asked my girlfriend Sasha to marry me, and it got me thinking about you and Mom. Haley's been saying for years that you were the one hurt in all of this, not Mom, but I didn't see it until Sasha and I had a serious conversation about our feelings. Sorry Dad, I was being stupid. I get it now. I just didn't want to be mad at Mom. I never wanted you or Haley to pick sides. I just needed you to understand why I had to go. Over the next few hours, Ethan and I talked a ton over some whiskey. Cherry made a delicious dinner for all of us as we caught up. Ethan ended up crashing on the living room couch because Cherry wouldn't let him drive her car after we had been drinking. Cherry, Maddie, and I sat around and talked. The groom's fam was at the wedding, with Prego, Haley and Mark, plus our little grandkid Brent, who's 2. He was chilling in next to Tracy, who's been flying a solo ever since Bob dumped her for some trophy wife a year back. The kids kept me in the loop about Tracy's drama, giving me bits of gossip here and there. I reminded them not to play messenger between Tracy and me. We are grown-ups. If we want to share something, we can do it ourselves. Hey, I had to call Maddie to come for the wedding. She's just a freshman at MSU, but didn't want to miss her big bro's big day, so I flew her out. Her, Ethan, and Haley have a tight bond. They even joke that she's my fave kid. It's cool to see them together. The whole debate about how upbringing is more important than genetics with kids. Yeah, that totally applies to us. Maddie and I have an unbreakable connection, no doubt about it. Cherry and I both went through some tough times growing up, but it's actually brought us closer together. We've learned not to take anything for granted, and we really appreciate the time we spend together now as single parents. Cherry quickly realized that having an empty nest meant we could be as loud as we wanted in the bedroom, and she didn't hold back. Man, hearing her moans of pleasure drives me wild and makes me want to give her even more pleasure. Some mornings we both wake up feeling a bit stiff and sore after a crazy night of gaming. After all the typical wedding stuff was done at the reception, Cherry and I hit the dance floor. Maddie also danced with one of Ethan's groomsmen, but not before Ethan warned them not to mess with my dad's favorite child or they'd be in for some serious trouble. I couldn't help but chuckle at that. I went back to the table after that. I did like 6 dances, but Maddie wanted to dance with me, so I stuck around for one more. I could tell Cherry and Tracy had nothing to talk about even though they were sitting close. Can you feel the tension coming from that side of the room? Maddie asked when she got closer. Smart girl. When I got back to the table, Cherry got up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. A minute later, someone tapped my shoulder. Looks like round 2 has started. Are you gonna rub it in? Bob leaving me? Tracy asked, leaning in close. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I replied. I know this might shock you, but I hardly ever think about you. I don't wish you any harm, but I really couldn't care less about your life or what happens to it. We had 18 great years, but that was a long time ago. I've moved on and I don't want to waste time dwelling on the past or what could have been. I had been scanning the dance floor as we talked, but now I turned to face Tracy and I could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of... She thought she could scare me with threats of ruining my life in the divorce, but she didn't consider the fact that I would be retiring alone. For a second, I almost pitied her, but then I remembered she would do the same to me if the tables were turned. I was a badass back then, and I'm still a badass now. I got up from the table and joined my girls on the dance floor. Subscribe to. Switch over to our channel so your buddy doesn't double-cross you, and stick around for the next story because it's way crazier than this one. If you're not old enough, don't even try to listen to the next one.